Yes, it is. Welcome, everybody. Please take your seats. We're about to begin. Welcome, welcome. Let me see if I can get this right. Pakhuis de Zwijger. Close? How do I do it better? Pakhuis de Zwijger. 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 Pakhuis de Zwijger. Rutger to you too. Pleasure to be here. My name is Laura Flanders. In the United States, we receive an awful lot of bad news. We make a lot of bad news. We also make some good news that you'll hear about tonight. I host a television program that is also a free radio podcast. And every week, I won't say we bring good news, but we say that the Laura Flanders Show, is the place where the people who say it can't be done take a backseat to the people who are doing it. So we feature people who are making real change in the worlds of arts, entrepreneurship, politics, activism, and you can find us online at lauraflanders.org. I am very happy to have been invited by the Transnational Institute, its amazing fellows program, its new politics program, and its transformative cities program, all of whose fellows are meeting in Amsterdam right now. So if you can feel the temperature heating up, that's because they're all here, bringing the heat of their intellect and their engaged intellect to this city. And we have invited you all to this public session to let you in on some of the super secret confidential strategies that are emerging from TNI, but more broadly to include this city, which, as I understand it, is going through a moment of exciting transition and transformation and possibility, to talk about cities as a place of transformation. We are all assembled here in a city that is all about assembling. Cities accumulate. They accumulate capital. They accumulate people. They accumulate aspirations. They accumulate power. And I think what we're going to be talking about today is whose power? Whose aspirations? And how can we find in the city a place of possibility for more than just the commodification of our lives, but for the common decision-making around our lives and for the liberation that cities can also bring? So, to kick off that conversation, although she says she's not an expert in good news, instead an expert in the challenges we face, I'm going to introduce our main speaker. After she has spoken, we'll have time to have just a few questions and answers. I'm afraid I am a fairly strict disciplinarian around questions. I like them to have a question mark at the end. We will then hear about an exciting initiative coming out of TNI's Transformative Cities program, and some award winners that are not award winners, and a competition that was not a competition, and it will be explained by somebody who understands it better than I. We will then bring up a panel of wonderful people with stories to tell about transformation and the challenges to transformation. They come from all over the world. And again, we'll have time to take some of your questions and provide some answers, maybe raise some more questions. And the only last thing I want to add is that this event will be part of a feature that we are producing for my show in collaboration with TNI. So our wonderful camera person, Isa Shakar, where are you, Isa? Voila, of Shakar Productions. If you need somebody, there he is. Don't trust the mainstream media, trust Isa and people like me. Isa will be filming, so implicitly by entering this space, you are agreeing to be filmed. If you do not want to be filmed, perhaps you could just raise your hand right now, and Isa is going to be roaming, and if he knows not to shoot you, that would be good. Video shoot you. Okay, good. Thank you so very much. And we should also say that we are being live streamed, so wave to posterity, live stream. Thank you for joining us on the internet. Our first speaker to kick us off is a Columbia professor, researcher, and she says explorer of strange places, Saskia Sassen. Yes, you're just right there.
Quite an amazing project that is being launched. I get there is a bit of a prehistory, but I really have such respect for the various, people, the institutions involved. It really is fantastic, and it might just be that a kind of revolution starts here. We have had a few in Barcelona, in Madrid, in other parts, but there is an energy here that is, I think, very special. Now, cities. Here's data, you can all look. Let me start with an image of cities. So cities are complex but incomplete systems. That is why they have lasted across centuries, across millennia. Think of powerful, formalized, closed actors. Kings, corporations, very powerful actors. They're all gone. Cities, the city where they operated, are still there. Of course, new actors emerge, et cetera, et cetera. But there is something interesting that we might ask, why have cities have such long lives? And the city has also been a space where those without power got to make a history, got to make an economy, a little economy, got to make cultures. So there is something about the city that will not let go. And I repeat, most powerful actors we have had in our histories were formalized and closed systems, if you want, and they're gone. So in that setting, I want to talk about two things. One thing is sort of how should we engage the question of the city? I think there is real work to be done. And I do think that a lot of the literature, the scholarship, the research about cities does not get us very far. Everybody present excluded, okay? You've all done fantastic stuff, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, there is a lot, there are hundreds and hundreds of books about cities. And they sort of look at it as just a material space. How does this work, how does that, the transport systems, the buildings. There is much more to a city, and that is why I repeat, think of it as a complex system where those without power also get to make a history, get to make an economy, get to make something. Now, I think that in order to reposition the question of the city, we need to go, I love this thing, before method. A lot of the literature, I don't want to offend anybody, I don't know how many academics there are in the audience, but a lot of the academic literature is a bit stuck, I would say. And not just in the question of cities. I think we have undergone in the West, and the West includes parts of Africa, and it includes certainly Latin America, and it includes parts of Asia, and certainly Europe and North America. But we are stuck in categories of analyses, in ways of understanding and describing that worked till about the 1980s. And then they didn't work anymore as well. What happens in the 1980s? What happens in the 1980s is globalization, privatization, intermediation. And that made a lot of difference. One interesting thing also, I think, to sort of bring into the picture is this notion of how do complex systems change? They don't change by changing everything. You often have a hard time detecting that a foundational change has happened. And I think with cities, this is what happened. In the 1980s, really in the late 1970s, remember cities were poor. Paris was poor. London was poor. Tokyo was poor. New York City was officially broke. Cities were poor. The notion was cities are finished. And in fact, people went, to the suburbs and to whatever, but the city was not a popular place. Now, Europe has always been different because you have such a long tradition of small cities. But in most of the world, outside Europe, it was not that way. You really had a sense that cities were finished. In Europe, cities were poor. Now, what happens when globalization, privatization, and a kind of corporate dominance come into the picture? That made a lot of difference. Now, globalization, let me just give you one little vector here. cities had these big corporations. They were all working on, they were sort of closed systems. They had the full array of workers in there, etc. When globalization happens, and privatization is part of the story here, then these firms begin to want to work in 70 countries, in 80 countries, in 120 countries. Suddenly, they could not do it all in-house. The moment that we really go global, the moment that the transformation happens from cities being sort of neglected spaces, they don't matter very much, etc., really happens when intermediation sets in. And I think this is important to understand. By intermediation, we can think of the fact that you're a firm that is operating in 15 countries, in 70 countries. You need 15 hours of Mongolian accounting, 28 hours of Argentinian preferences for investment, etc., etc. You cannot do that in-house. At that point, and the image that I have is a kind of operational space installs itself in these cities. It's like it comes from nowhere almost, but it is not endogenous to the city. It doesn't quite come out of the city. It's a collection of extremely advanced forms of knowledge, very, very sharp people, high finance, not traditional banking, etc., etc. That makes all the difference. But again, the notion is sort of a vast system that installs itself in these cities, which were sort of poorish. I don't know, Amsterdam must also have been a bit poor at that time. I mean, you can help me with that. But so at that point, a kind of wealth, a kind of knowledge sets in, which had not been part of sort of earlier forms of city, of city space, city government, city notions, etc., etc. Now then, I want to now enter into a bit of a discussion of what do we really need to be careful about? How do we need to handle some of these developments? How can we actually make a big change? And I want to look, if you want, at the innards, the inside of a city, rather than just the surfacing about the buildings and the traffic and all of that. What are the systematicities in play? Now here, this is what I call analytic tactics, right? I mean, so it seems to me that one task is actively destabilizing stable meanings. We need other modes of capturing this transformation. So powerful explanations, dangerous. We want to stay away from them. We want to rediscover. I think in some ways, groups like this have an advantage because you are not stuck in some very traditional modes. You're not stuck in, older. And these to me are sort of, as I say, analytic tactics. You can read them very quickly. I'm leaving all the slides here, so don't worry if you don't get to read it all. But there is a list of modes in which we can engage the city. Now, when it comes to the global city, there is such a vast amount of talking going on, So when I was doing my research, it is this operational space that I described before, right? So it's a sufficient big transformation when these firms are suddenly working in so many different countries that they need an outside body of experts, that they can call on for this, for that, etc., etc. So for me, the global city function in its narrowest sense is that intermediation function. That it's not just the firm and what it needs, it's a whole other world. And that world has power. High finance became the queen of the domain. And some of you probably know that the value of finance as measured by outstanding derivatives has reached at some points recently $1 quadrillion. Believe me, it's not money. If you take the value of all the currencies in the world, it's 400 trillion. So $1 quadrillion, it's not money. It's something else. We keep using the language of money. We need other language to capture it. Now, here you can sort of quickly read a bit there. But again, back to the global city function. The global city function means I'm a firm who's going to operate in 17 different countries. I need to have access, immediate access, to top-level intelligences about these different modes of accounting, modes of whatever. That is this operational space that installs itself in these cities. They have power, they are necessary for the corporates, and they never lose. The simplest example you're all familiar with is mergers and acquisitions. So you had the intermediate sector, the lawyers, the brilliants, the financiers, the Goldman Sachs, saying, merging, saying, you two should merge, then you can make much more money. So many of those mergers failed. But the intermediaries, the Goldman Sachs, etc., they didn't lose anything. They made money. They cannot lose. And today, of course, the world of finance is an extraordinary world. Now, I want to very quickly move to the world of finance. I want you to look at this graph. This is just one little graph about finance. So look, can everybody see this well? Wonderful. So that's below, right? That's below $1 trillion, right? 919 billion. 6 years later, 62 trillion. At that point, global GDP of all the countries in the world was less than those 62 trillion. Those 62 trillion were just 10% of the value of global finance as measured by outstanding derivatives, which is the standard measure, which was like 600 trillion. So what is that? That's not money. That's something else. We have to start thinking about this. That's a capability. It's a dangerous one. And by the way, I think that this term capability, we should really allow it to have many more meanings than the positive. It's sort of marked by something positive in English. You know, a capability is a good thing. That's a capability. And that's not a good thing. The language itself that we use, because there is intelligence there. There are brilliant minds that produce that. That doesn't fall from the sky ready-made. It's dangerous, so it's negative and it's destructive. Now, I'm going to sort of move on here. Other element. People don't know it. Economists don't know it. Microeconomics is so out of this domain. This high finance is not economics. High finance is something else. It's algorithmic mathematics. So Goldman Sachs, again, Goldman Sachs. So when you walked in there, you know, whatever, 20 years ago, the back room, 100 secretaries, beautifully. Today, you walk in, 100 physicists. This is physics. This is algorithmic mathematics. And people keep talking about it as economy. That actually destroys economies, frankly. So these and the city becomes a core site where you can deploy a lot of this capability. And so when I said just 10 minutes ago or whatever, a kind of operational space installs itself in these cities. And remember, these cities were broke. It's a whole new systematicity, economy, whatever language you want to use, that installs itself in these cities. And they grab place. And they want, well, before there were 3 families living, they want it all for one person. So you have the displacements with all, even here in the Netherlands you've had that, people displaced, the university, you know, that they want to close up, to move it, to make luxury buildings. You know, all of those things are not simply, oh, well, let's do it that way. No. These are systemic trends, and that is why they're so difficult to stop. And a lot of it, I mean, I'm emphasizing high finance. There are other actors, but I don't have time to do that. Now, this is also something interesting. So we tend to think that the central banks, our central bankers, they are our connection to the world of finance. In many ways, to the world of banking. We call it banking, but a lot of this stuff is really not banking. Well, Bernanke, the former head of the Central Bank of the United States, the Fed, when he retired, he saw all the good things, and then he said at the end, and there are 2 intractables. And one of them was this. And he said, most financial trading does not happen in the stock market. Remember, the stock market is a public space. It may be biased towards certain actors, but it is a public space. We can participate. He said, it's not in the stock market. It's in and he used the term dark pools. That's not my term. I could have coined that. Dark. Do you understand? And Bernanke was absolutely pro-high finance, but there were certain things he didn't quite totally get, I think. He was an economist. And this stuff is, this is not, it's a very radical statement that I make when I say this is not economics, but it is a way of pushing the necessity to separate. Economics has some very good things. The traditional bank, good, it's commerce, it sells something, it has money, we all need it. We don't need this. We don't need that extraordinary build-up of value. Now, so here what Bernanke said, he said, most financial trading, he said up to 70% now happens in privately owned networks. And they're owned by very powerful banks and firms. And he said, we don't know what's happening in there. And then they use the stock market as the public moment. They do a bit, nice pretty flowers and, stock market. No, it's not. It's not that way. And when he said, we don't really know what's happening in there, that's interesting. And of course, the media don't pick up on that stuff. They just pick up on the stuff that he says, whatever, the good things or the bad things. And so there is a whole other history that I'm trying to capture, a history in the making that we need to name, that we need to capture, that we need to find ways of describing, for which we need to find instances, instantiations that show this is that. Now, I want to do some of that now. Let me see. So here's an example. We had an extraordinary crisis that got a lot of attention eventually of housing. This was mortgages. About 16.5 million mortgages were issued to low-income households, very important, almost all were low-income housing. And what it was basically was a sign. You don't have to pay anything for 5 years, sign. You're fine. It had nothing to do with mortgages. It had nothing to do with housing. The way to think about it is a huge field where you throw in those 16.5 million little modest houses, and then you go to work. And what is it about? Asset, materiality, the high investment circuit. They really know their stuff. They said, enough of derivatives. I don't want any more derivatives. A derivative derives its value from something. So it goes on and on. Give me an asset-backed security. That field, with those 16 million houses, little houses mostly, asset. It was as if they had created a field, and that is why it's algorithmic mathematics. It has nothing to do with the economics. You had to devise, and I have seen, because I had a buddy in there in Goldman Sachs, and he showed me 6 extraordinarily complex steps of algorithmic mathematics. And then they transformed. This was a massive innovation. Regrettably, it was a negative one. But it transformed what looked like houses, what looked like houses not being able, when you have a crisis, a housing crisis. No, it was materialities, asset-backed securities. That worked so well. Mind you, national economies had a crisis, leaderships had a crisis. It was a disastrous event. It affected quite a few countries, but especially probably the United States. Now, here are the millions. Now, I want to mention something else. This instrument, by the way, has entered Europe. And the data go on, actually. So Germany, the numbers are much smaller than, it isn't in the many millions, it's just a few millions. But it's a brilliant instrument, it's a dangerous instrument, it's something that misrepresents reality. Now, here's another element. These are the things that we want to protect our cities, but our cities are now spaces for extractive logics, sort of modes of extraction. So, I'm looking at the top 100, and this is a bit out of date, but I have more up to date. I'm looking at the top 100 cities in the world. that are the objects of desire of buyers. So there's a lot of buying. I think in Amsterdam you have had that, you know that, right? You know that one Chinese company, for instance, bought like 5 of these grachthuizen. You know, I mean, you have a lot of that. And let me just run very quick. I'm leaving the slides here, so they're open access. This is a longer distribution. And this is just foreign, when foreigners buy. And there London is the queen. In fact, the queen of that, in fact, talking about the queen, the Qatari royals, and I have nothing against them, by the way, they now own more London properties than the Queen of England, which is kind of achievement. The main owner, however, is a duke that has been around for 800 years in different incarnations. So the other thing, and there is Amsterdam, of course, those are the figures of differences with the past year. It doesn't mean that it's a negative. And what you see, for instance, you know, I don't have the full list here, but look for the Chinese. Shenzhen is there, not Shanghai or whatever. Why? Because they've done Shanghai, they have done Beijing, they have done Nanjing. So you have other places where the buying is happening. In Paris, and in London, everybody's aware. In Paris, they're not aware. The Kazakhstanis are buying. I mean, it's just the Germans are buying up property, etc. Now, yeah. Okay, now I want to emphasize a second modality in which the material doesn't quite tell us the stories that it was capable in the past of telling us. So here I am walking with a journalist who wants to interview. I rarely go there. This is the center of London, very central London. There's the Thames, whatever we call it. And he had read my work, and he said, I want to walk with you in this area which you described. I don't go there because there are too many tourists. You know, I just am not interested. I've seen the river, and that's fine. One river will do, one view of the river. And so I'm walking there, and I'm hearing the tourists say, oh, look at these beautiful British buildings. All of those buildings are owned by one Chinese company. Now, I'm not sure that that's bad, but what I'm getting at is there are histories that are being made, and they involve material stuff, and there's a kind of lack of transparency. There's a kind of invisibility. That is what I find, you know, it's like we have to do a work of penetrating. Now, the top 100 cities that I'm looking at, 10% of the world's population, 30% of the world's GDP, 76% of property investment. Investment here is a very specific, narrow definition, in the sense that these are big buildings that are being, you know, this is a minority of buildings. But these are buildings of great value, buildings, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I wanted to get, so here is the worldwide real estate assets, according to Seville's, 217 trillion. I mean, these figures are extraordinary. And that is more than global GDP, which now is at 70 trillion. So you can see that when we talk economy, we have like 76 trillion, that's quite a bit, you know, global GDP. When we talk this stuff, we're in another zone. This is a vanguard all its own, and what is fascinating to me is that it deals with very material stuff, that it has been transformed via algorithmic mathematics in some rather complex, elusive something, and that the material, hence, as a result, is no longer closed in simple, you know, dress. It's impenetrable, the material. Now, I wanted to very quickly show you, do I have 2 more minutes? 1 minute? 2. I just lost 30 seconds chatting about my minutes. This is 65,000 buildings in the Greater London area, which are all owned by offshore owners. Not a single one is owned. I didn't prepare this map, by the way. Not a single one is owned by a British. And the entities are all entities. There is no name of any person. You know, it's sort of a very... So this stuff is weird. London is an extreme case, I must say. Now, I want to say Manhattan. This is very important. So we have in Manhattan built luxury towers, and they're increasingly empty. Some of these now have even lost the few residents that they had. The standard notion is, oh, poor investors they lost. Nobody's renting. No. There is another modality that has set in. What I described for the mortgages of those modest houses, you take all of those little houses and you create a field that gives you assets, etc. You can play with it through very complex transformations, as I said. The same thing is happening with this now. Those empty towers can make more profits than if they were inhabited. Why? Because asset-backed security. Now, I hope you don't have to understand the deep character of what I'm talking about, but what I want to clarify is that between the building, its materiality, and what is actually happening is a whole set of very complex operations. This is extremely problematic. This also de-urbanizes a city. I want to conclude. Pass. So, formats of the future. This doesn't hold for Europe, by the way, clearly. We're moving in many parts of the world to this type of format. A very strong juxtaposition of, this is meant to be luxury. This is in Latin America. It's not particularly high class, whatever, but, a real difference. This is a juxtaposition of two realities. I'm a photographer. There is no place in the world, I want you to know, because people come always ask me, where can I see this? The truth of the matter is that both are real, but you can't quite see this juxtaposition, right? So this is what we in Latin America would call la periferia. So this is another story that is hitting cities, and that is the land grabs, the destruction of land, of water bodies via mining that is affecting non-urban areas. That is producing a massive escape by especially smallholders, small sort of farmers, etc., to cities. So in a way, a format of the future is this kind of thing, where you have this juxtaposition. And if we don't have land, we build them on water. Now, I like to end with this picture. I'm not going to read it to you, but the city, ultimately, we need to protect it. And especially because the city is one place where for moments of the day we can all become urban subjects. And it's a place where those without power can make a stand, as in Latin America, I love that, and say to power, I'm not asking anything from you, pero estamos presentes. Okay.
Stay there. You're staying there. We'll
okay.
answer some questions.
Okay.
So we have a few moments. We have about 50 minutes. We will take some questions. I have two. One is just a little bit about this moment.
Yes.
You end with this sense of this extraordinary power, and then you throw us a bone that we also have extraordinary power. But can you elaborate a little bit on why the city today is the place of such decisive development?
Okay. One of the reasons that I talked about power in the city, negative power, is that the battle for the city is a real battle. And we have to believe that at some point, number one, this particular system that I described, this financializing, etc., it's running out. Like we can already see. It's now Shenzhen, it's not Shanghai. What I showed in there, right? So that is why I wanted to show those things. So, but right now we're still in the midst of a kind of crisis around, the housing question, everything is expensive, etc., the concentration of wealth, all of that. So I think, and that is why I started also with this notion that cities have outlived, across the centuries, very powerful, formalized systems of power, right? So this is a very particular moment where it might feel like, how are we going to change this? But actually, it might just be that they have run out of options. They've done the big buildings, they've done the little buildings. I mean, everything is a curve. No formal system lasts forever. And so beneath this absolutely overwhelming grab, that is English, grab, huh? Grab. So lies potentially, and that is why I see this kind of activism as it's happening all over the world. I just was in Shanghai, it's happening there too. There's a real activism about urban space. Before we know it, this kind of power has run its course. It will still be there, but the grabbing part will have exhausted itself. We need to be ready. We need to fight, we need to be ready, we need to know what is it that we want to install in our cities, what is it that we need. And here, to me, for instance, just to give you a little example, I have been very interested in how all the digital apps that we have, how little of that, I'm sure the Netherlands is actually different, I'm thinking of the US now, how little of that addresses the needs of low-income neighborhoods, of low-income households, and the connection between those two spaces, right? There's a lot of work that we can do, and that also is being done. So often I think that an army of little interventions can actually make a difference. Secondly, I repeat, I think that this particular formation of power that we have, I think it's beginning to, what comes next? I mean, they have grabbed so much, they have financialized so much. Right now we're in the middle of a rather severe crisis, I would say, which is a bit invisible. It's not like simply beggars all over the street. It happens in very complex settings. But it's not going to last forever. But the cities will still be there. So we might as well start working on it now, right? I mean, that's a bit the notion here.
Reminds me of the black feminist Flo Kennedy, who said, what is power more afraid of entering through the door, one lion or a million mice? I see hope in that. Okay, yeah. Who has questions for Saskia? 3 questions. I'm going to take 3. 1, 2 more. And the microphone is going to come to you. We're going to have a handheld mic come to the gentleman here, there, and there. So 1, the woman in the pink, the man in the white shirt. First, right here in the second row. Do we have only just one mic?
Yeah, you already told us a little bit of what would be the solution, one of the myriad of little solutions that we could have. But in the case of the Netherlands, maybe you have some advice to us how to deal with this process, which is very strongly at this moment present.
I know.
I'm very, because how can we achieve some difference through the politics? Because this is the instruments, local politics, instruments we have.
Yeah. Well, there is a sort of a wake-up call that is happening. The mayor of London also finally has understood. It's not just about, I need housing, I need modest housing. It's about the grabs that are happening, that we are losing ground. So I think that, this is not my forte, I must tell you, because it also depends on the intricacies of a political system, a local political system, and what is happening. But I know that in cities like New York and London, so much damage has already been done, I have started a new project where I'm beginning to look at, which I call ethics in the city, which is by definition an imperfect ethics, It's not like the beauty. I find all the books on ethics, they stop at, the beauty of it all. And they never enter the space of the city, which inevitably is going to have inequalities, But I'm using this as a way of saying, look, certain inequalities we can accept. And one of my questions is, I think we, the middle classes, we don't know really what the poor find acceptable and unacceptable. There's a kind of dignity built. My Latin American experience has shown me that. So I think that what we can do is recognize, that there are all these different modes in which this is being experienced, number 1. Number 2, the political classes need our help. And I think that's happening a bit in the Netherlands, isn't it? Because there are a lot of activists who have understood the dynamics of a place. The politicians often, they don't get it. But I also think that people should understand that the standard explanations that good journalists put in the newspapers, etc., that they might be missing the point a bit, that they belong to a slightly earlier era when it was a bit more like what we read now in the newspapers, the descriptions, the explanations. So, I would say that there really is work to be done, and it's micro work, it's understanding, it's enabling. I mean, just to mention something very practical, this whole notion of, well, for me it is, a rhetorical question I like to ask. Do I really need a multinational to have a cup of coffee in my neighborhood? No, I don't, right? But that's mostly happening, and certainly many cities have suffered under that. So it's micro-level intervention, and I'm very interested in those who are modest, in the modest neighborhoods, in saying, yeah, we can make a difference. We can, but it means collaborative work. Now, I think Europe is much better positioned than, say, the United States. The United States is really a weird culture in many ways. No, and I'm not just thinking because of Trump, by the way. Huh? Trump didn't fall from the sky ready-made. Trump was made, and our political system was part of that making. So I just, yeah.
Okay.
But there is much more to be said, But yeah.
Thank you for your question with the question mark. Actually, we're going to the woman in the pink right behind you, and then we come to the man in the white shirt. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My question was actually quite similar to the gentleman's question, but on a more practical level. What can we do tomorrow in our own neighborhoods?
Yeah. Well, for me, the thing is, what can I relocalize? And relocalize is not just food gardens and all of that, but that too. But it is whatever. What all can we relocalize? Now, if I need a cup of coffee, I don't need a multinational. If I need a computer, I probably do. So there are definitely limits. But let's understand, what can we relocalize? We've got to get out of the franchising. The franchising is an extractive mode. All of this, by the way, that I've been describing, I like to think of it as these are extractive logics. Facebook, Google, well, that's extractive. They got information about all of us. They made $1 billion very quickly like that. They sold it to big. And, that's Google is extractive. Now, I happen to need Google. We all need Google. It's pretty reasonable and very strong utility function. But when you begin to look at this, the franchises are extractive mode. Part of whatever the consumption capacity of a locality leaves the locality. Mm-hmm. If you have a local shop, local this, local that, it can recirculate much better. Stay away from the big banks if you want to put money in a bank. Many of the big banks have become financial firms. They still call themselves banks. I think this is a real problem.
In our white shirt.
Yes, I missed a little bit in your earlier story the role of what we have come to call the creative class. Actually, in my opinion, they were simple artists, activists. For example, in Amsterdam in the 80s, when the city was really at a low ebb, they were the ones that installed all the beautiful things that were there in that particular time. And only later, what I call the capitalists came, and they took over everything and rebuilt it and started something that we are now looking at every day. So that is also my fear, because if you say we have to relocalize and be modest and do some things small, then it may just be that the whole process will repeat itself.
Well, yes and no, because we do learn. There is a learning curve. But I agree, what I have focused on the one hand, are the capacities of very powerful and dangerous actors. And on the other hand, very modest interventions. There is an in-between, and I think if you have big groups of people that are beginning to mobilize, you can go way beyond what I was just describing as simple examples, how even in our own neighborhoods, we can begin to relocalize, is one way of putting it. All kinds of things. Now, by the way, we have a whole list of apps that we developed that would give, I don't have time to describe it, but I'm happy to send that. I wrote a long paper about this. How can we use the digital to enable localities and to allow them to create transversal modes where they connect with each other, where they learn from each other. And I always start from the point that we humans, whether we're here, whether we're in the fields in Africa, growing beautiful things, whatever, our intelligences are more or less the same. I don't buy the notion that, there are, not at all. So let's use our intelligences, But I agree, there's a whole other world, more complex world that I simply don't have the time to talk about in this short period. But how do we enter certain corporations? How do we enter systems that are meant to benefit us, but are increasingly extracting? Like the health system in England, which was for so long so good, has now become very problematic, actually, right? So how do we enter those systems and recover? Those are more complex discussions, but I think that is part of the story. Part of the story is entering all kinds from very simple things that I used to illustrate to rather more complex things. We cannot delegate to politicians or to experts the rescuing of a national healthcare system. We have got to understand, we all know people who know the innards of the innards, the insides of it. And so there is an enormous amount of work. But really, what I wanted to capture is that all of us in our diverse places where we live, etc., can begin to participate, can begin to make connections with not just politicians, etc., but also with experts, doctors, etc. There are a lot of people who are up in arms, around the whole healthcare question in the United States, I think in the UK, So this is a very live example right now where people are beginning to see, wait a minute, including doctors, who are employed in those systems, say, this is not right what's happening here. Let's capture that. So it's a whole set of modes, but the notion is that you find a field, you find a domain, and you say, I'm going to enter that domain. So I'm going to look at the innards, the innards. I love that phrase.
So I have a question for you that I don't know the answer to, and maybe pertains to what you were just speaking, but I'm sure it's a question on many people's minds. Your T-shirt. Migrating kitchen.
Right. Okay, this is in Vienna. 5 Afghani cooks who cook very well, and in Vienna and certain parts of Europe, you have always a lot of festivals. So they have this moving kitchen that they take, and they really cooked food, and then they produced this T-shirt. Now I love this T-shirt, and this was about 3 years ago, I think, and I didn't dare to wash it. I like to use it because I said, I'm washing it and it's going to be all gone. And then I finally had to wash it. Now I've washed it about 100 times. This is an amazing stuff. If they cook as well as they, elaborated this, then there's something to do. But this notion that I'm a cook, I'm a refugee in Vienna, nobody wants to hire me as a cook, I'm setting up my own kitchen, my migrating kitchen. That is a very nice example of sort of, grabbing a moment, a possibility. But thank you for the question.
Saskia Sassen. Be careful. So next up, I want to introduce Sol Trombovila from the Transformative Cities project of TNI to introduce our non-winners of our non-competition. Sol.
I think I might know you.
Wherever you want, but
Good evening. Is working? Yes, well, I'm extremely thrilled to be here tonight. It's a very special evening for many different reasons. We are extremely glad this is happening finally. I just introduce myself. I'm from Spain. I live in the Netherlands for 8 years, the last 5 in Amsterdam, where I work for the Transnational Institute. TNI, what TNI is, for 40 years, we have been working between social movements, critical academics, and policymakers, trying to be a nexus to create spaces where solutions, where initiatives can move and thrive and progress, and try to bring solutions to the global issues we are facing. So we have a very special crowd today. I'm saying very good comrades where we have been working together in the streets in the last years. We have the enormous privilege to have initiatives from all over the world that will get the stage in a moment. We also have the presence of the leader of GroenLinks, which we are very happy about that. But also we have persons from other parties that are also taking risk and are trying to go forward, from the PvdA, from the SPE, from the BN, which is also bringing a new inspiration to the city, and also social movements and activists. what I'm going to spend very few minutes is to understand how we launched this Transformative Cities initiative. And basically, we were trying to understand and deepen the understanding, and we hope this night helps us to understand what a fearless city is, or what a transformative city is. And we started with our interest on cities because we think there are strategic advantages to try to do activism. Those who are activists, we know how difficult it is to campaign, to create social majorities that can become political majorities and eventually will transform certain aspects of our lives. So locality it's very important. I don't think I will consider myself Dutch at some point, but I feel Amsterdammer after 6 months in this city. And I think that's something that the cities have this capacity to bring people together. And the other element is access to a basic right. So that's why we launched this Transformative Cities initiative, trying to mainly give visibility to transformative practices all over the world, because we knew that another world is possible, but now it's already happening if we look closely to it. So now I'm just going to briefly pass to the video that try to explain in 2 minutes what the Transformative Cities initiative is. So we launched this vote, and it was open for a month, and it really put us out of our comfort zone, I have to say. We have long debates in TNI. How come if we're against competition, if we actually about cooperation to the commons, how we are going to do this competition? And we tried, and we test, and this is the end of the first award edition that, as Laura said, it's not about winners. It's really about highlighting transformative practices, and this is exactly what we are going to do, what we are doing tonight. So we had 3 issues, energy, water, and housing, and we had 3 initiatives that a global team of evaluators thought were especially intriguing and interesting and would be good to know more about. So we commissioned local journalists who brought stories of these 9 places, and people voted for them. So for energy, we had a table of energy transition in Cadiz. We had the Richmond Progressive Alliance in California. They were mentioned briefly there, so I don't go into detail. And also we have the Power Shift campaign of Mauritius, that we have some people who made all the way from Mauritius tonight, and they will take the stage later. However, we didn't know who was going to win, and we didn't want to give anything special to the people with more votes. So we organized this before knowing the results. But when we told the people of Cádiz, well, you actually got more votes, they were extremely excited about. And they sent us a very short video that we are going to launch because they got more votes than anyone. They sent this today.
And the winner is...
Cádiz! Thank you for your support!
Yes, it turned out that today they have a local assembly to try to advance the energy transition agenda, and they send us this video. So they are one of the initiatives that is being highlighted in this award. The next one, I'm going to be quick because I really want to give space for the guests are going to discuss later. For housing, we have amazing experience in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Imagine what is to do a grassroots radical transformation in Africa. We have Solapur in India, where women got organized and built 10,000 houses. And we have Barcelona and Comú. Who doesn't know about Barcelona and Comú and their fantastic job? And they are bringing hope. At the end, those who got more votes were actually the fantastic women from India in Solapur. And we have a message from the first ever, because they also send that these days, and for the first ever woman who is the Central General Secretary of a Confederation of Trade Unions in India, and they send this message for us.
I am happy that the Transformating Cities Atlas has recognized the efforts of the CITU to establish a housing colony for the BD workers in Solapur. CITU has been trying to organize the BD workers, and one of the important issues that was taken up by the Maharashtra State Committee of our BD Workers Union, particularly in Solapur, is to provide them with housing facilities. So the BD workers, the CITU started organizing them first on their local issues, on the issue of work, on the issue of wages, on the issue of identity cards and other benefits. And most of them were women, and they were dispersed in different areas. So the leadership had to move house to house and create confidence among them that they can be organized, and by coming together they can achieve increase in their wages, etc. So once they were organized, they started getting more or less regular work. The other benefits like identity cards, etc. were also, they were able to win. And this was one of the important things, because in other places also we have been doing this, but the particularity significance of the Solapur initiative is that thousands of houses have been built for the BD workers, utilizing the provision in the BD Workers Welfare Fund Act, and through continuous persuasion. It is around for years together. At different levels they have given representations to the corporation to sanction the land at cheap rate, and then from then onwards up to the Government of India level, because the BD Worker Welfare Fund, the commissioner is at the national level. So up to that level they have made representations, and our CITU leadership was also involved. Comrade M.K. Pandey was involved in that, our former president, and particularly the serious effort of Adam Master, who was a former MLA and now also continues to be the guiding spirit of the union. I think this award, this recognition to the union, to the CITU's efforts in Solapur, will encourage the other trade unions and other organizations to take up such initiatives and help the workers, particularly in the unorganized sector.
We are again going to initiate a new project of 30,000 houses in Solapur, Maharashtra for the unorganized sector. We repeatedly asked to the state government and Government of India to contribute financially for same project, and they approved and agreed. Now we have started construction of these buildings, housing for the unorganized sector. We hope within a short period we will complete it and hand over to the workers. We are happy for the recognition of CITU's housing scheme at Solapur, Maharashtra. We are grateful, all of you, and we hope this will become an inspiration to the world. Thank you.
So we at TNI are very excited also about this initiative, which was really unknown for us, and we hope this will trigger others to know more about this initiative and to implement similar in other places, like why not in Amsterdam. And the last one I will mention is the water issue. We have 3 initiatives: Grenoble that was mentioned, Lagos in Nigeria, and a community initiative that built their own water plant in Cochabamba, Bolivia, which many of us know from the historical water wars that were extremely politicized for many of us, like myself. And at the end, after a very close vote, with Lagos very close, Cochabamba gave most inspiration of the voters. So Cochabamba got most votes for the water initiative. And in this case, we do have somebody from Cochabamba tonight that I will give the award for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you. 18 years ago, we had this. We won. We had a small victory in my town, Cochabamba, in Bolivia, against corporate power. 18 years later, it's good to know that we are still inspiring people to make change in the world. So thank you very much to TNI and Transformative Cities for looking not just at the struggles that we have in our countries, but also the victories and the alternatives we are building there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Marcela. I will close here. I give the word to Laura. Thank you very much. Good evening.
All right. Sol, thank you so much. You can leave this here. You can leave this here. We don't want Marcela to be alone at this table, so I will join her over here, and I will invite some other people to join her in order of our videos that we have here. Rutger, Groot, Wassink, come on up here. The party leader from GroenLinks in Amsterdam. Kali Acunio from Jackson, Mississippi, and Cooperation Jackson. Kali, come on up here. Ashok Subron from Mauritius. Where are you, Ashok? Power shifter. Harriet Bergman from Code Root here in Amsterdam. Very good. This is you. So, we have challenged our panelists here with one of those annoying challenges to which they have all agreed, and that is to answer in just this first round. We have one more, I'm so sorry. Ana Mendez, I'm so sorry. Ana Mendez, come on up. Thank you so. Forgive me.
I was trying to.
We reorganized, and Anna, no disrespect intended. We have given everybody the challenge of speaking for 60 seconds. In the first go-round, we will not continue this format. This is just the format for this go-round. 60 seconds on the question that you will see behind me in just a second. The question is, are you ready for this, everybody? Can transformation at the local level deliver solutions to systemic global crises? And we list some: inequality, climate change, corporate capture of democratic institutions. We can think of many more. Implicitly, the question has to do with a how, not a whether. I don't want anyone to just answer yes or no. There's a clock up there. Who wants to go first? Anna, because I dissed you earlier. How about letting you go first?
Well, thank you very much. Well, as you might know, in May 2015, many municipalities were won in Spain, not only Madrid and Barcelona, but also Zaragoza, A Coruña, Santiago, Valencia, Palma de Mallorca. So I think that from our experience, of course, the local level delivers solution to systemic global crisis. In our experience by 3, I think, main fields. One is stopping the plundering that Saskia was speaking about. I mean, all these global processes actually got into the territories, and the local governments have the capacity to stop the privatization and the neoliberal forces and their plundering. The second in the case of Spain, it's very important. We have fought the paradigm of austerity, the idea that the public cannot do because their hands are tied up by budget restrictions. That's a long story. And I think that the third one is the implementation of measures towards social, economic, and political democracy. And yeah, I will be here.
Stop the plundering, provide an alternative austerity. Marcela.
I think yes. The answer is yes. Sorry, you said we shouldn't say yes, but I think an important thing that we need to do is connect the alternatives we are building in our countries. The local alternatives need to be connected, not only multiply and expanded, but need to be connected. And I think part of what we're doing here right now, it's we're connecting the struggles, the issues, the alternatives that we have in our own local places.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I have to say yes as well. No, I feel that cities can be a countervailing power to, for example, nation states, and I think that cities can be effective in combating climate change, for example. If you look at what New York City or California is saying to their president, is basically saying, we're going to do Paris whatever you say. And I feel that from being a politician in Amsterdam, that we can combat inequality, we can, in a way, try to combat the huge influx of capital in our city. But what is crucial is, as you were saying, that we have to build a network, and for politicians to be it's quite a complicated relationship, but to have a relationship with more activists in the street. Because if you're just trying to do it politically, you will fail. If you just try to do it as activists, there are chances that you'll fail as well. So we need, in a sense, a new cooperation, from my point of view, between activism and politics.
Thank you. Ashok.
Coming from a new country that was created by colonization and inspired by vibrant revolt by a woman who burned the Dutch barracks at the time, I would say that our experience of cities is very different, but we are getting a new experience, what is called smart cities. What the speaker said before is very important. If we don't initiate actions, collaborative actions, articulated with political action to challenge the dominant politics, we will be moving towards what is called the private cities. All these big money, big property buyers, they are now into creating new cities, private cities which are not municipalities, private cities which are not local government based, but new entities. This is the new global apartheid, but small initiatives can challenge it, but if articulated with challenging political power, even at national level.
Cully.
All right, this is almost impossible to do in 1 minute, but for us, we work on it. But for us, I think the first thing is building off what you just said. Having the capacity to share our vision and to actually dream, but to put those dreams and that capacity into concrete organizing campaigns and forms that people can actually hold on to and implement in their lives. And for that, in our context, we've been very explicit about challenging power, but also very explicit about presenting a vision of a new society and a future that we all have the ability to construct with our own hands in a very practical way. That's a concrete thing I think that cities can present, and I think the more to the how that I think we all have to get a little bit better at, which I think is part of the reason why we're here, is coming up with the tools that we can share to other people in other municipalities, in other regions and zones, so that they can also take up this struggle and then work and apply it in their local context to build power.
Thank you. Done. Harriet.
So, how do we locally fight global problems? And I think it's by grassroots organizing. It's, I think, by giving Rutger the leverage to do the change and also giving him a slight push maybe in the even better direction. So I think that what I want to do as an organizer is to push those in the system in the right direction and also give them leverage. So I'm part of a grassroots organization that prefiguratively fights for climate justice. And that prefiguratively means that we are already doing what we want the world to look like. And I think that's very important. And I think that's, I only have 20 seconds. And that's also only possible at a very small grassroots level. So that's why I think it has to come from local initiatives that can grow, of course, and get bigger. But I think it's those locally situated that are not entrenched yet in the power structures that we're facing. So that's where change is. It's from you and me.
Beautifully done. So, insofar as we have perhaps just a tiny sense of what each of us ourselves is up against, we probably know less about what each of you are up against. I'm not going to limit you to a minute, but I think it would be helpful for us to get a sense of what do you feel is the biggest challenge in your own community or city as it pertains to these global crises, because the global crises, when they hit home, aren't global, they're very, very local or even personal. So just to inform us or share a little intel about what you are each up against. Who wants to go first? You're nodding, Cully. Why don't you go first?
Because I'm not. We are up against a long crisis, is what I would say. I think a lot of our focus and a lot of our conversations is about the kind of crisis of the present, but that crisis doesn't reach and affect everybody in the same way. And for some of us, and I'm going to speak from my position now as a person of African descent, you know, this has been a 500-long ordeal of a constant, non-ending crisis. And there's nothing about the moment, there's nothing about Trump, there's nothing about any of this which is new, either in my own life or new historically. You know, does it mean that all of the assaults and the attacks are exactly the same as they were 20 or 30 years ago? No. But there is a dynamic of kind of a changing same when you're looking at being on the other end of kind of the Western world and its aspirations and its worldview and its power. So being situated in what we call kind of the belly of the beast in Mississippi, you know, we are faced with a particular dynamic of Mississippi now, by most indicators, is the poorest state in the United States. But at one point in time, for about a 20-year period, shortly before the Civil War, it was the richest state in the Union on the basis and on the backs of the labor of my ancestors. But it's impoverished based upon that same relationship, which hasn't changed, you know, fundamentally in the last 150 years. So for us, there's changing this dynamic of being, number one, a population, you know, in a forced diaspora, not one of our own making and choosing, being in someone else's indigenous homeland, trying to build a new future of our own democratic making, and one which is, you know, striving to build self-determination for not only for our community, but for all the communities and peoples that live on the territory that we occupy. And we're doing this in the context of being in the heart of what I would argue to this point, and hopefully nothing ever is this as strong as the United States, but, you know, the greatest empire the world has ever known, with the tremendous amount of political weight, military power, and just the constant how would you put it? The constant threat of force, being articulated. And that's the piece around what I mean by in this constant struggle. So I think there's this narrative of a bourgeois democracy that exists in the United States. But for most black people, we experience that as rule at the end of a gun, rule at the end of a lash, rule at the end of a whip, wherein we only get to choose how to obey and how to be compliant. That's not democracy. It's never been democracy for us. But we are now trying to create a liberated space, not only for ourselves, but for everybody. That is our context. And one of the jokes, and I'll end with this, that we've been saying to a lot of folks throughout the United States is, after Trump got elected, our main joke was, welcome to Mississippi. Now you know what the rest of us in Mississippi, what we've been subject to and what that rule is about. And part of the joke is to just level the playing field, but also there's another part of it which the joke is about, is that resistance is possible under every situation and is necessary.
Marcella, what is a fearless city, a transformative city up against in your context?
I think it's fear. Because that's something that doesn't let us act, doesn't let us do things. We're in constant fear that we're going to lose or we're going to risk. I'm thinking on the one woman in Bolivia that, among other 4, organized a strike that put down a dictator government that we had. And when somebody asked her, what's the main enemy, she said the fear. Something that doesn't let us do things, the inaction, the idle no more. It's a good example of, how can we make change losing the fear that we have.
Anna, how would you answer this question?
I think that our biggest challenge is to be up to the situation. I think that for the municipalist movement in Spain, as I said, with many cities, small towns, small villages, 2 of the main metropolis in the country, and with the history of the May 15 and the feeling of a movement that change was possible, that people realize that there was a way that we could actually self-manage our lives. And 3 years ago, they trust us with this. And then you get to the government, and I come from a part of the government that is from the social movements. I had no tradition in institutional politics. And you enter the institution, and the institution is a machine, which is very complicated, and it drags you in, and it separates you from the people. And Madrid is a more than 3 million inhabitant city. It's the biggest municipality in Europe. And we strive to keep in contact, to really implement these democratic measures, to be able to listen to the people, and at the same time to fight all the forces and very serious attacks from the powers that are fighting against us, reappropriation of the public and the politics, and also this trying to open up to the citizens in general. So if I think of our biggest challenge, it is to be true to the movement. As Ada Colau, the mayor of Barcelona, has this print in her door which says, never forget where we come from and who put us here. And that, for me, is a very important, I think, challenge.
Ashok, we're going to see a video in a moment about remunicipalization in the area of energy and power. You are intimately connected to the power shift story in Mauritius. Can you give us a thumbnail of what was happened there?
Yes, we just want to produce the power. Because power distribution is the one who produce and distribute power are those also who controls power in society. So we have realized, fighting a coal plant and winning the battle, but then we need to have the alternatives. And this is how we set up together with small farmers, with citizens, cooperatives, doing the technical work, and then building the cooperative, having more than 400 small farmers and citizens, applying to get the permission to supply the electricity to the grid, and then we realized that this is the state. And the state is controlled by those who have economic power and the multinationals. So this experience brings us more to the road of challenging the state power while building the alternative. So it's inseparable. And you ask me how this experience is also energizing and building other movements. I'll give you an example. 1 month ago, I was on a beach, public beach. We are known for good beaches. And we had a big wall, like a fencing, being installed to decree this beach as private beach. And we, together with Danny and many activists in Mauritius, we smashed the wall. We were being arrested. But then the question is, when we smash and destroy this wall, what is the alternative? Then it comes back to building eco-social tourism, and now including the PowerShift project, that is the PowerShift campaign, that is building eco-lodge and use the cooperative, citizens cooperative, small planters cooperative, to furnish power to grow our own food to these eco-lodge where we want also to build a school. This is our vision. We need to dream. And we also learn, I mentioned the woman, and I'm appealing to my Dutch comrades here. This woman, they burned the Dutch barracks during colonial times. And we want to honor her because she has been forgotten in history. So if there is any comrades here in this room who want to help, we want a translator who can translate a court trial where this woman was convicted and slaughtered because she rebelled against slavery and colonization.
Give us her name.
Anna de Bengal. Thank you.
Thank you. We will come back. We will come back to Amsterdam as soon as we have seen the following video. Run the video. Thank you. So, Rutger, you are the party leader of the biggest faction now in the Amsterdam government. We tried to figure out a translation for your title. We came up with alderman. Talk about a current resonance. How do you see your position? How did you get to here? How did we in Amsterdam get to this place? briefly? And how do you see the challenges emerging? What do you grasp as your primary challenge in this sort of first breath of your new role?
Well, I'm not quite sure if I know how we got here. I've been in office for a week now. I'm still confused and feeling like Alice falling down a rabbit hole. So I'm not quite sure how we got here. No, but I think that in general, we had our elections in March, and I think there was a general feeling among people from Amsterdam that something had to change, and maybe we were just the vehicle of this change with some other parties. And if you look at, and these are the main challenges I see for the city of Amsterdam, is that we definitely have to green the city, and we have to combat climate change, because climate change is one of the main challenges that we face, not only as a city but also as a country. And the way you combat climate change, for example, I just read that Hamburg is working on a just energy transition. I think that's one of the main issues for Amsterdam. But also, if you look at increasing social injustice, increasing polarization between people, that's one of the main challenges from my point of view. And I think that there has been a democratic deficit, that there are a lot of people who organize, for example, energy, for example, the helping of refugees, and a lot of people are acting in bottom-up initiatives, and we need to find a way to support those initiatives. In a sense, we need to redefine the way the government is talking to its citizens and the relationship between government and citizens. And for me, as being in office, we said that we definitely wanted to be part of the Fearless City network. And we had contacts with Barcelona, we had contacts with Naples, and I feel that a lot of inspiring things are happening all over the world. And what I definitely know is that we cannot do this alone in Amsterdam. We have to have new cooperations with cities. And I think that there's a lot to learn from other cities. And we're just at the beginning. So I'm very interested to visit you also in Madrid, to stay real to our. I think that we are just starting, but we cannot do this alone, and we have to do this within a broader network. And I feel that Transformative Cities, Fearless Cities network can help us with that, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to work on.
Mm. What would you like to add to that picture, Harriet?
Well, that I think good intentions are not enough. So true, yeah, of course you already know, but I think it's when you want to become a fearless city, you have to, I think, it's not just a happily ever after. And of course you know, but I think it's important for both movements and cities or important people running the city to keep in mind that it costs, that you have to make a decision, that you have to weigh certain things. That, for example, if you are against climate change, you might have to say, hey, the Van Gogh Museum is sponsored by the fossil fuel industry, that's not okay. Or if that you are against climate change, you look at the harbor and you see, hey, that's the second biggest coal harbor there is in Europe, that's not okay. And I think that to become a fearless city, you have to be fearless. And we heard that fear is one of the things that holds us back. But I think it's fear and also those power relations that are entrenched, and it might make it very, very difficult for someone like you, and even more for me, because I, of course, have the problem of the police, which is a bit scarier than the VVD. Well, we can debate about that. But so there are the people we're up against. So that's one, or the institutions we're up against. That's one thing I think we have to be aware of. And that might get in the way of our good intentions. But I also think that our good intention might get hampered in some way by our own limitations. So when I said that Code Rood is prefiguratively organizing, that means that it's very hard work most of the time to confront myself with my own inherent racism, ableism, heteronormativity, and that to organize in a way that I want to see the world also costs me. something. So I have to give up things as well. I have to be aware of things as well. And so if I say, if you say, oh, I want to be a fearless person, I want to become a fearless city, whatever you say, it costs things. And I think we have to be aware of that sacrifice.
Rutger wanted to hear from Anna, from the experience of Madrid. What do you want to share with our friend here?
I think that, well, the fearless city, how we call it in Spain, it's more the concept that was given to us was ciudades del cambio, cities of change, and it's also for me it's difficult to try to figure out what is this change. I think that there must be a basic understanding of what you are standing, where you are, and where are your capacities, because you can overcome fear, but there is not. I mean, there is a limit to bodies. If we are thinking about another kind of politics, and I think that is very relevant in relation with the feminist movement, and we have to take those challenges that is not in a way that there is like final solutions or that there is like final goals, that there is everything or nothing, that there is like this dichotomy. I think that there is a tendency in politics to judge in a very binary way somehow, no? And in failures and success, and there is a difficulty to actually acknowledge the process and where you are inside this process. So it is, and that also happens because you have electoral situations, so you have to come at the end of 4 years and say, hey, we got this and this and this in 4 years, and then we are going to get this and this and that. And then to say, yeah, this we tried, and you actually made some kind of improvement here, and we have learned a lot about that, but this is not really finished, and this is a thing we could maybe do it, but this is doing okay. It just doesn't really fit with a political electoral discourse, no? So what I think is necessary, and maybe we didn't have enough time to do it because it was very sudden, this process in Spain, we made it in 11 months, was to have a common understanding of what we are at and what are we going to sacrifice, and to recognize that we cannot sacrifice everything at the same time. It's kind of complicated. It makes life a little bit difficult. That different people have different priorities, but that to get the basic understanding and the basic decisions of what are the challenges that you can fight together. And I think that is very needed because the time and space and even the texture of being like we always talk about being in the institution and outside the institution, but actually Raquel Gutierrez was she's Mexican, but she was also a long time in Bolivia. She once came and said, like, Ana, you are getting it wrong. It is not that the people that are in this institution are inside, they are outside, because they are outside your movement, and actually it's you that are inside your place. That is, that is rebellion, but these two spaces have different textures and they have different times. And it's not that the institution is faster than the inside. The inside, it's just that the times are different. And the language sometimes is also different. So I think that getting some basic understanding of what are the common challenges and what are the shared priorities is like maybe it might get like the beginning is slower, but I think that is the kind of time that it's going to pay off in the long run.
I want to bring Kali in on this. You have helped to bring 2 mayors into office in Jackson, Mississippi, and you have worked inside the City Hall and outside the City Hall. Do you want to address this question of inside, outside? And I'm also still haunted by Saskia's creepy capability of accumulated capital. You are in the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
About accumulated capital, the Confederacy has accumulated a lot over the centuries. So how can you talk about, would you talk a little bit about your experience?
I got that same deep breath and pause. Well, I think for one, I think we need to be as clear as possible in this phase of the game, and I mean on a global scale, but also local, where and how transformation, I think, ultimately happens. The state is a site of contest, but I don't think, and this is subject for our debate, it is the primary agent of social change. Is it an agent of policy change? It can change certain aspects of structure, but there are deeper aspects of how we have been socialized by capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, of which policy are small little tweaks that either add on or take away from. But the deeper aspects of our socialization into new beings have to deal with those kind of overall systems. And I think, at least in our experience, keeping, what Ida had on the banner about remembering who you are and where you came from, that is a harder task than I think we want to admit. And in my experience, I would say there's 3 mayors that I helped to get in office. One in Oakland before this, before Jackson. And there's some serious disconnect that we have to figure out between social movements that ascribe to putting people in office to move certain either limited or broad objectives, and then putting some of our members in office. There's some lack of translation that we haven't quite figured out how to hold people accountable in the long term, but also how to move our actual agenda forward in the kind of juxtaposition space where the social movement and the state both intersect and conflict at the same time. And I think that is a challenge that we have to figure out, but I think I would lean towards an orientation that, number one, we are not putting anybody in office to be there for that long, right? That you walk into that place with an end date. As an individual, you walk in there with an end date. The social movement may have a need to continue, or the political parties may need to have a need to continue putting people in place. But there has to be a serious transmission around building our members and our people's capacity. If we're not doing that, then quite frankly, I would argue from my experience, we're wasting our time pursuing the state because it captures, right, the individuals if they're not really tied to the social movements and to our own independent democratic structures.
Marcela, Bolivia had a comparable experience, obviously.
Yeah, to me it's more like, you seem a good person. I think you'll do your best. But for me, the question is more what the rest of you, what are you going to do to keep him in the right track? And I think that's a big responsibility too. We shouldn't leave all the weight on his shoulders. What we're going to do as an organized community to keep him, going in the way that we want him to go. So I think that's very important to think. That's not just delegating somebody to decide for ourselves, but what we're going to do ourselves, organized, in order to make this work. I think you need to dance. And you are the other part. Don't forget that. Don't forget your importance in this process too.
Thank you.
Ashok, you want to add anything? And then we come back to Rutger here.
Yes, I would like to say that I'm very happy that you are in office right now. And I would say that we are living in important, not only biological time, but geological time. And if we have one lesson to learn from the last 500 years, is that the vision to see human being and nature as object has to change. And if it has to change now and very rapidly. And this is the kind of vision that we, in our country, I'm also in a movement called Resistance and Alternatives. And this is the philosophy that we want to bring in the transformative process. Because when we saw people as object, we transform people less than this table. This is what colonization was about. The Code Noir described human being as a table. And from this vision, we transform, this capitalist vision, transform nature and living organism, as object, as commodity. And this is the mess that we are now. Civilization itself and the reproduction of life itself is at stake. So if we were in office at your place, we would bring this as centrality in whatever we do. And what does this mean? If we treat human being as subject, then participatory democracy is on the table. Then the right to recall is on the table. If we treat living organism as subject, as an element of nature, not as object, but as living organism, as part of an ecosystem, then nature rights becomes an issue on the political agenda of transformation. This is what I would say in a broad sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Responses from you.
Well, it's extremely complicated to respond, but in general, every comment has been, in a sense, critical, but also in a positive way, because I already told Harriet immediately that I strongly agree with everything you say, and I know that that it's going to be tough and it's going to be difficult. I'm strongly in favor of having end times for politicians. My party used to have that. It was abolished. I was strongly against it. But I think that the most important thing is that if you, this is not about transforming the city. This is also about a transformation of politics, about transformation of democracy, and also a transformation of, maybe as you were saying, looking at the world. And I was very thankful for what you said, because even before I came in, I told someone, I know an activist from Amsterdam very well, and I said, what this city board needs is strong activism to keep us on the right track. And so thanks all for these comments. And I know the stakes are high. I know it's going to be tough. But Harriet, have a little bit of faith.
Yeah. Go ahead. Did you want to add something?
Well, yeah. First, two things. First, a question to Rutger. So you want politicians to have an end time. Then hopefully you also want the coal harbor that I already mentioned to have an end time, and Shell's art washing practices in the Van Gogh Museum to have an end time, and maybe the We Are Here not having a house having an end time. The second thing, because I very often hear a question from the people inside the room like, oh, what can we do? And I've made a small list for you. So I will read it for you. If you are a student, you could join Humanities Rally or the New University and fight neoliberalism at the university. If you like food, which most of you do, you could eat at Guerrilla Kitchen and fight your radical friends there. If you like art, you could join a performance of fossil-free culture or give them money. If you like the planet, you could join the action of Code Rood. If you dislike Airbnb, you could join Fair City. And if you dislike Nazis, you could join the next Antifa demonstration.
All right. So, I'm going to take a group consensus that we could have 10 minutes of questions and answers. Is that okay? That will take us to 10 minutes past 10? Yes. Hearing no objection, we move forward. Let's have 3 questions. From people that haven't asked questions before, I'm afraid. Here, 1. I exercise aggressive affirmative actions. Some women, come on. Hello? Thank you. Okay, so here, behind you. Sorry, sir, we only have 1 question per person. Okay, go.
Why cities? Why now? Saskia provided us an answer that some of us, I think, had difficulty following. But the point that Saskia made is cities and now because the hyper-financialization of our economies, the algorithm-driven logic of these dark pools has reached its logical end. And the people who are left in cities have to find solutions created by this kind of economic development.
I'm waiting for the question mark.
Why cities?
Why cities?
Why now?
Okay, that's 1 question. That's our second question here. Let's take 3 questions and then we'll let our panelists respond. Why cities, why now?
Hi, I work in the field of social innovation here in the Netherlands, and what I'm identifying is that there is a certain tension between having to register and monitor the impact of grassroots initiatives, because of course there can also be adverse effects, versus the impact being quite oblique in a lot of cases, and the fact that it is hard to monitor and that it's good to have them in the first place. So do you experience that tension as well between having to measure impact versus maybe not being able to demonstrate that directly?
All right, the tyranny of metrics. Third question, maybe over here somewhere. Or in the very back. In the very back, sorry, sir. Now we're aggressively affirming the back. Yeah, back there.
I'm not sure how can I formulate this fast, but cities were states from the beginning. The art, religion, power. I mean, it's human ecosystem, as a complex system, was born there. And as Saskia said, I mean, this fear of something managing the world, life, God, aliens, whatever, the power, or Bilderbergers. I mean, this systematic accumulated knowledge is studied by radical students of this. I mean, we have this 18th, 19th century of transformation experience. On the one hand, we have the fear of radicalism of this sort because of maybe revolutions happened and that experience, but also the fear of the other side, the fascism, etc., that kind of radicalism. So I'm afraid we have also fear of this kind of aesthetic of radicalism. I talk about it. We kind of implicitly talk about classes, class struggles. How can we learn from all these experiences without that fear? How can we get rid of this fear to infuse education, radical education, into the activism of politics of the city, of rural transformations of today?
I think I hear the question. Can you sum it up in 1 quick question? Do I hear like 1848, 1968, we've had rebellions in cities?
Yes, very shortly, like Das Kapital. I mean, only book, first book, describes how the crisis emerged and how hot finance emerged as a kind of god ruling everything and turning everything into rent. And then Lenin has a very good book about it. But we cannot talk about this without being, without fearing that kind of radicalism and learning about this kind of stuff.
How do we overcome our fears of radicalism, I think? Okay. Why cities, why now? We treasure what we measure, but how do we actually decide how do we prioritize measuring? Yeah, kind of. What value do we put in measuring? Resistance and change, kind of. And then this question of education, but to empower, not to terrify. Yeah? How do we address our fears of radicalism? I think. Akali, thank you for saving me.
Well, I want to turn that question on its head a bit. I'm in fear of the perpetuation of the now, right? Because there's a terror that many of us live with now, which is a radical terror. I'm much more willing to participate with you and everybody in this room in some experiments that may have small gains and make a lot of mistakes. But I would like us to make some new mistakes. I know the mistakes we had some debates, or discussion earlier about the Enlightenment. I know that very well. I live on the other end of all its glory and magnificence, which has been an utter horror to most of the folks who look like me. So I think there's a way in which, looking at some of the experiences of the 20th century as being frightened, I would try to encourage you and everyone else to say, I think there's a benefit to those experiences, that there's a lot that I think that we can and we must learn from, and to take it as a benefit that we went through experiments that were not particularly democratic, that were not particularly human emancipatory, but that doesn't mean the quest for those things is wrong. It means that we have to improve the practice of how we actually go about accomplishing the goal. And so I think that is our struggle. But the thing that scares me more of why I think we need to be big risk takers is that if we keep on this present course, humanity and complex life will be extinguished. That should be, I would hope, your greatest fear and our greatest fear. We can't keep doing what we're doing, right? So being able to take chances and to take risks, I think we all need to be open to that in the context of being steadfast students of the past and not necessarily sit with irrational fears or fears that only privilege one class continuing its rule against the rest of humanity.
Who wants to address this important question of how do we measure transformation? Anna, you've been in city government.
I put it on the table, so I take it. I think that to me, it's not such a way, it's not so much to measure it in a quantitative way, but I think that we should understand it. We should have the ways to understand how it is produced, how it works, and actually to communicate it in a way that can be replicated. And I think that for me, the measure, if there is any measure, will be this capacity of replication and communication of a certain practice, if we talk about social innovation. And I think that when I said that in order to measure change, we have to know where we are, it's not that we need it in order to put degrees, it's that we have to know what is the common ground. Because if we don't know where is the common ground, it is very difficult to actually even envision, this where are we going? Because people come from different places. And so for me, I think that the over-quantification of processes is not interesting, but some kind of analysis give you the tips and the insights to do it somewhere else and do it better?
And the why cities, why now? I mean, we could be having a conversation about spreading more broadly what cities have. So outside of cities, yeah, Harry.
Well, I think nobody ever measured the small adjustments in white capitalist heteropatriarchy and what they brought us. And that's why I think that's why now, like 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, we should have already started. I have a friend, Benjamin Fro, and he has a song, and it ends with, "I know that you're scared and you just don't know how, but the right time for change is always right now." So that's why now. And that's, in this context, also why cities. It's a really easy one, because we're now in a city. The cities are the places where most of the people come together, and the city are the places, like Saskia said, that are open, so that have the possibility, the capability to change and have this transformative power. So that's why.
And how do we keep permeability in our cities and in this conversation, in the sense that Saskia also talked about unfinished systems, and we're talking in an era of migration and an era of constant change?
I think the old left, we have an issue with the old left used to tell us we have to go from X to Y. I don't think it's about that anymore. It's not a linear thing that we have to go from this type of city to a different type of city, but it's more about what we do daily. What are the changes that we're doing daily? And it's not about, it's not a linear path that we're doing, but perhaps more in circles. And I think that's very important to understand, to not feel like we have to arrive to something, but to focus more on the process of the things we're doing. I think process is very important. The motivations that we have are very important. And rather than getting into what we want, it's how we're going to achieve that we want.
Rutger, I think I'll give you the last word. Your motivation. Why are you doing what you're doing? Your end date we talked about, but you're at your start date.
Why I'm doing what I'm doing? Because I think that the most basic thing is that I feel that living in this city, this beautiful city with its all these wonderful people, has to be a city where my children and my children's children are still able to be part of and to emancipate themselves and to have the same dynamics in the city that this city has. I mean, I think that Amsterdam has been a city where emancipation has always been a possibility. There's always these dynamics. And if you look at, for example, climate change, where if you look at the influx of capital, it's dividing our city in pictures that Saskia showed us. And that's maybe my worst nightmare. So maybe my main motivation is keeping it an open, incomplete system. Because I feel that if it's a complete, perfect system, then everything is lost.
Beautiful. We end in complexity and incompletion. We have a few people to thank. I want to make sure that we thank the Pakhuis de Zwijger. Better? I want to be sure that we thank TNI, the Transnational Institute. I want to be sure to remind you to check out the book table out front. You can acquire the books, little exchange of money. You can sign up there for more information about TNI and all of these marvelous programs, and you can make a contribution. I come here as an American. I have no shame in asking you to contribute to the services that you appreciate. We need to support our independent media that hosts conversations like this. We need to support our fellows who spend time on a mission that is not necessarily going to bring them creepy accumulated capital. But it does bring us all capability. And I want to thank all our panelists, Anna, Ashok, Kali, Harriet, Rutger, Marcela. And finally, to mention that there is, in addition to books, also a bar outside.